Dear participants, dear viewers, we are starting the conversation, and the topic is the masculinity in times of COVID-19, how pandemics affect men. And the Ukrainian version is on Facebook, and the English speaking is on YouTube. So the pandemic touched everybody, and all countries have suffered, and people get sick, get infected despite the social status and financial state. But pandemics affect men and women differently. And we all now know that people of different age groups have a bigger or smaller risk to get infected, to get COVID-19. And it turns out that the infection affect men and women differently. And among the most significant gender differences of coronavirus is the difference in the number of deaths. For example, in the USA, from COVID-19, twice men died from COVID-19 than women. And the same in the Western Europe, 69% of all mortal cases are men. And the researchers assume that the immune reaction of the women or body is stronger, but despite the fact on the body, there's also the social impact we are going to discuss today. So we'll speak about masculinity and how the pandemic has affected it. Before introducing my guests, you can add your questions to the chat, which we will read and ask the participants at the end of the session. And now it will all be very scientific, due to the grounded assumptions and findings. But the first question is not going to be well grounded. It's going to be very simple, because I'm very curious what masculinity is. That's why right now I will ask our participants for the following. So each of you, in 15 seconds, please answer the question: what is the feature of masculinity, or which feature of masculinity defines our behavior during the COVID-19 pandemic? And first 15 seconds will be given to Eugen Bondarenko. He's the director of the Ukrainian Youth Center. The floor is yours. Yes, greetings to all of you. I'll be brief. It's probably the wish to be the main person and make all the decisions. Since I work in the Ukrainian Youth Center, we have the team, and we have to work in accordance with these restrictions, with the lockdown restrictions. Thank you, Eugen. And now Viktor Zolotarenko, he's the student of the master degree from after Olesa Honchar University. So the masculinity feature that you think defines masculinity. Greetings all. I'm not going to be very original here. I'll just join the words of Eugen, but I think that it's mostly the try to defend the family. And I have a girlfriend I live with, and how I express my masculinity is trying to be careful, trying to make it safe, for both of us, to protect her and myself from this infection. And now this question is to Alan Greig. And Alan Greig is an expert on masculinity, UNDP consultant, USA. Perhaps he's going to tell us something else. Alan, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Andriy, and hello, everyone. I think what strikes me about the problems of masculinity in relation to COVID-19 is the expectation that men should be strong and not weak, because they associate weakness with femininity. And I think that's led to problems in terms of men taking care of their own health and taking care of other people's health, because they've seen mask wearing and other protective behaviors as admitting weakness and not being strong. So I think that's a problem that we need to talk about. Thank you.
Дякую, Алане. І, напевно,
Thank you,
було
Alan.
абсурдно
I
питувати
guess
нашого
that would be absurd to ask our participant, Tamara Martsenyuk, PhD, author of the book on masculinity, Defenders of the Galaxy, Power and Crisis in the Men's World, Ukraine, how she defines this behavior during pandemic. That's why I will change the question. So what are the which masculinity features catch the eye most of you as a person, not as a scientist who's just observing what's happening and what's going on? Greetings to all of you. I think it is the feature like overestimation or underestimation of one's state of health, because on the average, even visually, we can see that men wear masks less often, they less visit the doctors or see the doctors, and it's a typical feature. They are less like carry or worry about themselves, and they like think that their health is good enough. Thank you, Tamara. And in these presentations, I saw also some stereotypic thoughts, like because men should be like this and women should be like this. Like the man is to be responsible for the protection of himself and for the protection of his partner. But ahead of us, we still have 50 minutes to clarify this and to encourage all of you asking questions. I will tell you that a person that's in the opinion of the participants asks the best question will get the prize, the book, The Defenders of the Galaxy by Tamara Martsenyuk. And during 4 or 5 minutes, Tamara Martsenyuk will give us a brief course of what masculinity is. Perhaps when answering this question, we didn't have the correct understanding. So please, Tamara. Masculinity, those are social expectations, certain social expectations of what it means to be a man. And as Alan said correctly, and such stereotypical signs or features of a man, they are defined as opposed to the femininity. And it is also connected with a certain traditional social stereotypes, which are dual and polar. And for example, orientation on success is often associated with men, being active, making money. Perhaps the only emotion they can have is aggression, because it's considered that real men don't cry, they can't complain. And they are those who are to always a good state of health, so they have to be physically strong, fit, and masculinity is also another term is connected with masculinity as so, and like the hegemonic masculinity, and also there is such a notion as the crisis of masculinity. Those are the challenges and problems men are facing in the period of some social historic periods. For example, pandemic is also the period that evokes the masculinity crisis. It can cause it because masculinity is more status-like. That's why men are using the institutional privileges. For example, if you are a man, then the employer is ready to pay you more because the man is the main bread maker, is considered to be the main bread maker. But for these institutional privileges, men are to pay certain dividends, so to say, like a bad state of health as compared to women, and some destructive practices like alcohol addiction, drug addiction, and so also some risk behavior and suicidal behavior and so on. So we see that indeed men, just like women, suffer from some gender stereotypes and are as such social challenges like pandemic make them face a number of problems. Even if this brief report, I heard something new on the risks that men are facing more. Speaking about alcohol and like cigarettes or drugs, I've always known this, but now that men are more inclined to commit a suicide, that's something new. And although on this is also, it seemed to me that Tamara was speaking not about, men, but robots. Like robots don't cry, And if to associate a man with absence of tears, that's what it is then. What will Alan Gregg tell us on masculinity? Maybe he can add or extend the idea, or perhaps he can also question something.
No, I agree with everything Tamara just said. I think it's important also to think about the ways in which men's expressions of masculinity are also affected by other aspects of their lives. For example, whether they're working class men or middle class men, or whether they come from, white majority communities, or I live in New York City. So there's big differences between white middle class men like myself and our experience of COVID compared to working class men or men of color. Death rates and infection rates are much higher by class and also by race and ethnicity, and that's linked to the jobs that those men do, the exposure they've had to COVID. One of the worst hit sectors in the US in the early days of the pandemic were meat processing plants, where large numbers of men were working in very poorly ventilated spaces, but those were immigrant men, so men from Mexico and Central America. So they weren't just men. So I think we need to think in broader terms about what's going on in terms of men's exposure to risk and the threats to their health as well. So that's one complexity to think about as we continue with the conversation.
Дякую, Алане. Повертаємось
Thank you,
до
Alan. Going back to the Kiev studio, and Viktor Bondarenko, how much is it for your social and age group? Those masculinity features are peculiar that Tamara and Alan mentioned. Are you? I'm speaking to Eugen Bondarenko. Well, I can speak about myself, about my social group and my age group. So, I have arrived from Crimea, and as Tamara already said, and she was right, masculinity is also very obvious in the crisis period. I have been through different crises. For example, the Crimea annexation, it also caused certain consequences, and what I have already emphasized at my work, and that is trying to go through and be more attentive to certain details of what is happening around you, trying to always control the situation, because loss of control over the situation in Crimea, societal, I mean, it has been reflected on me during control of pandemic COVID-19. And it seems to me that I live in some parallel duality, because on the one hand, there is the risk behavior when you are putting something at risk, but on the other hand, I worry a lot so that my employees would change their masks often and use the disinfectants, so and all the other stuff. As I can tell about me, that this double reflection on the crisis situations led in masculinity to that you have to try to control what is happening around you twice harder. Very interesting. And it's interesting that Eugen didn't put it just in the context of the today's event, but also connected with what happened before during the crisis. It was mentioned that these features become more obvious. And I can also refer to it, but I wouldn't say control, but the times are changing. Now, Viktor Zolotarenko, your comment. So the question was whether my masculinity and my understanding of masculinity correlate with the interpretation of masculinity of Tamara and Alan, right? Yes, and to which extent what you are observing in your age and social group is depicted there. I will probably take a deep dive here, and I will say that to me, my masculinity I started expressing my masculinity brighter when it started its formation more actively, when I was a sophomore, when I knew that I want more from life, and I started to do active public work. So my masculinity was expressed in the way that I got more aggressive on the concerning things I wanted. I started taking active steps to achieve my goals, whether they were clear or abstract. I think this is the key indicator that I will agree with, that in the society, it's just that we are used to say it that way. When we describe masculinity, we mention that it's about achieving your goals and also being active about it. That's how I can say that I expressed it. If to speak about display of masculinity right now, it's the constant search of ways to provide security and safety for me and my family, and ways to also to get finances. So always looking for the new opportunity to combine work with some projects perhaps, or to find the possibility to realize other projects or implement other projects. Thank you, Victor. And now we were discussing our personal examples more. And of course, we heard the participants of Ukraine more because it's about Ukraine. And I have a question for Alan. And what is it important to mention? So what can you mention from the results of the UNDP studies or researches, and what is worth mentioning from there?
Well, I think the main thing that was coming out from the research was this issue of men, and particularly younger men, taking self-protection less seriously than women. So men being less likely to say that they're going to use a mask or maintain social distancing, or even take the threat of COVID-19 seriously. And more men than women were saying that COVID-19 was caused by Bill Gates, for example. So more men than women were subscribing to these kind of conspiracy theories about where COVID-19 comes from. So I think the issue of self-protection, and then the issue of young men and misinformation and disinformation about COVID are two issues that UNDP is now trying to think about how to address in some campaign, and maybe working with youth services to talk to young men directly about those issues of protecting their own health and other people's health, and also getting the right information and being suspicious of this disinformation that's coming out. A lot of that, online on the web. That's what we really need to address. Thanks, Andrew.
Alan,
it's very important what you said about those who support some conspiracy theories. But if there is some statistics, how those who, for example, say that there is no COVID among men and women, what is the statistics? And a second question, how many men say, yes, there is COVID, it's very serious, but everything is in God's hands. And whatever you do, things will actually happen in the way that, the fate uh, is decided.
Yeah, I don't have the statistics in front of me, but there were differences between men and women that were statistically significant in terms of those different, understandings of where COVID comes from and the kind of attitudes towards taking care of one's health. And I should say that, there's a lot of, over the years, we know from different kinds of research that in general, as Tamara said, men use health services less than women. Men take protective behavior for their health less than women. And certain behaviors like smoking and drinking are more prevalent in general amongst men than women and put their health at risk as a result. So there's a whole issue around health protection and health seeking behavior that we need to work on, not just in Ukraine, but in many countries.
That is why I addressed this question of the person who is the international expert. Now, I would like to ask those who are organizing this session to show us the photograph that shows different attitudes and threats of men and women to this. And right now, we see how pandemic affects men and women. Can you make it bigger? Well, in any way, Tamara Martsenyuk, who is in the studio right now, she is very much familiar with this, and I'm asking her to comment on this and to express also her thoughts or opinions on why it is like that. So please note that right now our respondents, men and women, are youth from 14 till 35 years old. And it is also very important because Alan mentioned that young men, they are in the risk group of those who do not stick to the lockdown rules. And we see that in Ukraine, these tendencies are similar to the international. So the difference between men and women who comply with the lockdown rules is 10%, and it's the average, of course. And if we look at different rules, like wearing a mask, disinfecting and washing hands, so these are certain practices uh, that are about taking care of your health. And these findings and results, they are very much expected because there are certain statistical data and results of, and like opinion polls on the state of health of men and women showed us that there is certain gap. And in general, men, they overestimate the state of their health. They take less care of themselves. Less uh, they follow less the instructions of doctors. And perhaps we can explain it by those expectations and socialization, because from their childhood, men, boys are told that they are strong, they can go through anything, they can bear anything, and that they should take care of themselves less. And women have this attitude also because women don't take care only of themselves. They also have to take care of their children, of the elderly people, of people with disabilities. And in fact, women they have these um, uh, norms of behavior and complying with certain rules from the side of the state also. So this is the behavioral situation that really requires changes, because we know that in Ukraine there is a big gap on the uh, on the duration of life in men and women, and the gap is almost 12 years, and men who are retired, they don't live that long. I guess we can already we can probably show just Tamara, not the table. We have another infographics which concerns the so-called risk behavior or of destructive practices, like some bad habits during the lockdown, because inability to communicate, being locked in a small space, also had negative consequences, mainly if we take a look this infographics, then we can see that it concerns alcohol consumption, and it was expected because even the average statistics in the country as compared to other countries, for example, of the EU, men consume a lot of alcohol drinks. Our alcohol is cheap, and that's very usually as a factor. Why, for example, you would ask why youth is more inclined to drink alcohol, because in this case we see men were more inclined to also have these bad habits, which are usually the aspect of the dangerous behavior. So please, let's stop encouraging further on. Let's move to another one. Yes, and such behavior like alcohol abuse causes also the death rates. We know that men live less, and probably it's also because of the risky behavior on the road, like RTA or driving after consuming alcohol, and also violence. By the way, another challenge of pandemic is the being closed in certain space, and we know that there were also two negative consequences, that the number of violence has increased and the victims are usually women. But another important aspect, that the suicidal moods have also increased among men, and there is the statistics of hotlines, calls, because pandemic brought the economic crisis, and we know that men are expected to make money, and maybe because they were fired or their salaries were reduced, and they affected this role of them as bread maker, led to certain suicidal moods, even suicides. Another problem is homeless people. Among homeless people, men are in majority, and this is the group of people, they couldn't stay at home anymore because they had no home. And we see that in Ukraine and in the world in general, men are facing such big challenges connected with economic crisis caused by the pandemic. Dear Tamara, it's what your reply was like very well grounded, but I would say it's interesting, but it is rather sad. But I have one question concerning masculinity. When we see such difference in the attitude to rules, the lockdown rules, or the hygiene and sanitary norms between men and women, can it be partly caused by replying the question, I want to be more like a real man? And he says, that's why I ignore these rules. Although it's not like that. I had 20 seconds to answer. Also, we have to understand that all these norms that are connected with such a feature as care, and women and girls are taught, to take care. And that's why women have this important habit, when there's a threat to their health or health of those who they take care of, or it needs more attention, when they don't know what to do, they are carefully studying some instructions or manuals, and men don't always have time, and men can be more oriented on survival, on as so being the bread maker, they can be more oriented on the resources, leadership, not having the possibility. But I can tell you that it's not all that bad. There is certain positivity to a lockdown, and it's also concerning the young group of men. There is the constructive practice as a result of the crisis, uh, the parenthood, and also the caring practices. I think there is a positivity of the lockdown when being in one in certain premises for a long time and doing certain work showed men that in fact how important the support of the household is, helping children, for example, who are studying. And it's also the possibility to see for them and to actually live and to experience that. I think that it's very important to share it with women. And here I see certain optimism because it's a higher readiness, higher level of readiness of to positive parenthood, fatherhood, and to productive practice or the reproductive work with women. And but can we also add to the fatherhood, the grandfatherhood? Yes, of course, grandfathers are not that many left because the chances to live, to actually live to that age to become a grandfather is less. And now I have a question to Yevhen. Right in the beginning, when you were mentioning your features of masculinity, you mentioned care about your relatives or members of the family. For example, for Eugen Bondarenko, also he also, I mean, but it's important to understand who are the relatives or members of the family, because to him his colleagues are also his family. So after what we have is discussed, do you think that it's the feature of masculinity, and or is care just the woman prerogative? Okay, let me start, and please comment the differences in statistics also. I guess I will start with the comment saying if care is the display of masculinity. The researchers' colleagues said that the man wants to have everything under control, and care can also be one of its reflection, in the situation that they got into. I would like to say that one of the manifestation of masculinity and how this control can manifest in my life and lives of my colleagues is that when you try to control, or it feels like it's a victory that you are to get, some, I don't know, awards. But the COVID-19 pandemic, it created a very long lasting situation when the expected victory is postponed all the time. And now you see the situation that the world keeps on being in the pandemic situation. And when they can't gain victory in the short, and they can't have the short-term victory and postponing it for a long-term perspective, it imposes certain, uh, you know, difficulties. And the colleagues researchers also mentioned several times that being locked in some space and change of their behavioral social contacts Unfortunately, I do not have children. I take care of my pets that I have, but it's also a kind of care. I started spending a lot more time with them than before the pandemic. And what was their reaction to it? Well, I think they feel great. They like it, but they had to get used to it for the first month. So this surplus of care, because you are in another environment, it starts transforming masculinity, and the control of a situation becomes care. So it can be one of the elements of this transformation. I also wanted to comment on the hygiene. Here, I guess there is the surplus of the behavior. And anyway, the hygiene situation in regions of Ukraine, especially among youth, before pandemic was critical, but the pandemic COVID-19 changed it a little bit, but still the level it's still not well enough, because we see that women are more attentive to hygiene than men. And the lockdown restrictions period, the pandemic period, is not that big. And we can observe the change only like 5 years later, perhaps. Just like we can see the changes in the youth policy in other practices. Well, I think that thanks to your participation, we will be able to see those changes even sooner. And I'm giving now the floor to Viktor Zoltarenko. Yes, indeed, Yevhen said a lot, and I was listening to him very, very attentively. Yes, he did say much. But when I was thinking about this, I had a very brief reply. First thing I thought, I wouldn't divide care and protection. I can't say that it's only for men and that is only for women. I think that protection is care, is one of the manifestation of care, and I can't say that it only refers to masculinity. This is my personal opinion. As for statistics, frankly speaking, I wasn't surprised, and the argumentation was very clear. Men, they just think that they're superheroes, they're super strong, they can overcome anything. And well, yes, they can get sick, so what? They'll just get through it. It's just a disease, they see no risk. And this just didn't touch me personally. I mean, I wasn't light-minded. I did get infected, and it was not that easy. And then I felt anxious during the pandemic, because it is a threat to health. And the fact that I'm young, it doesn't mean that it's going to save me. I guess I'm not the representative of the young audience, but I'm not surprised that people take less care of themselves, and I mean men. I think the statistics can change, but when it will change, I don't know. Thank you. Mentioning superheroes reminded me of the book Defenders of the Galaxy by Tamara Martsenyuk. I will remind you that this book not only is not just interesting and useful, but it's also the gift for the best question. And all those who are watching us on YouTube or on Facebook, I'm encouraging you to write us questions so that we could present them to our participants. Otherwise, you will be left without a book. And now I would like to give floor to Alan Greig again, expert on masculinity, UNDP consultant. We have heard a lot about statistics. And what is the dynamics? What can masculinity transform into? What are the examples in the world? And what is, can you talk about the transformations caused by this pandemic?
I mean, I think when I think about transformation, what I'm thinking about is changes in relations between men and women, gender relations, so that we don't get these hierarchies between masculinity and femininity and between men and women. So how can we change to a situation where there's more equality or equality between men and women? and other people of other gender identities. And I think Tamara, when she talked about the opportunity that there is because of lockdown, for example, for men to be spending more time at home with their families, this is an opportunity to change those gender relations at home so that there's a more equal sharing of responsibilities and parenting and household tasks between men and women. Usually that work, bringing up the children, taking care of the household, is seen as women's work, and as a result is usually devalued. Not, that's true in lots of countries. That's true here in the US, as true as anywhere else. I think what's troubling is that this opportunity, I think in many cases, isn't being taken. So I think if you look at research, for example, in the US or in the UK, where I'm from, it seems that during lockdown, it was still women who were doing most of the household work and the homeschooling of the children. In fact, that burden of responsibility of taking care of the home and the children seemed to have increased on women. And it wasn't being shared more by men. So we need to be talking more with men about that sharing of household responsibilities and taking care of children, not least because men will benefit from being closer to their children, having a closer emotional relationship to their children. So that's one area of transformation that we need to look at. I think we also need to be pushing our political leaders to be setting a better example. So in my country where I live now, former President Trump set a terrible example in terms of refusing to wear a mask for many months, minimizing the danger of COVID, very much embodying this masculinity as strength and invulnerability that has been such a problem. Boris Johnson in the United Kingdom, where I'm from, similarly downplayed the seriousness of the virus and the need to protect ourselves from it. So we need better male leadership on these issues, and we need to be pushing, UNDP can play a role in pushing men in positions of leadership and authority to be setting a better example. And then I think finally, we do need to keep coming back to this understanding that the economic issues that men face, this pressure to be the breadwinner, are not just about gender, right? They're connected to class, particularly. Many middle-class men have not had a problem during the lockdown. So men like me who work a lot from home anyway on a computer, we can continue doing that work. It's working class men particularly who have to go out to work, whether be working in factories or driving buses or trains. It's those men who've either lost their jobs or need to keep working and therefore continue to be exposed to the threat of the virus. It's those interactions between class and gender that we need to think about when we think about the pressure on men to fulfill that responsibility of being the breadwinner. So we need to think about those issues as well when we're developing our work in response. Thanks, Andriy.
Alan, this was very interesting and very deep, comprehensive. Yes, we often forget about the connection of masculinity and problems of masculinity and social status of the person. And since you gave us examples from the US and from Great Britain, I have a question caused by my personal observations. To which extent is it important the inevitability of punishment? Because in Great Britain or in the USA, there are reminders everywhere to wear the mask, and it says that it's your obligation according to the law. But if you just take a look around, then 50% are not wearing it. And it seems to me that in Britain there was a certain mistake, or Britain made a certain mistake because of the democratic traditions. They thought that people will follow the rules themselves. But maybe you don't know, but in Ukraine, the punishment for violating the lockdown rules is very rare. What can you tell us?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I mean, to me, the problem in the UK and to some extent in the US was that they were giving a very mixed message. So that, you know, they told people they should wear a mask or not shake hands. And then Boris Johnson said he was shaking hands with people during the early days of the pandemic. So he was ignoring his own medical advisor's advice. It was also enforced very unequally. So there was, I don't have the exact statistics, but in London, it was shown, some research showed that it was young Black men who are much more likely to be punished for not wearing a mask than young white men, even though the rates of mask wearing or not wearing were not that different. So there was a kind of racist, you know, no other way to put it, there was a racist policing of those mechanisms, right? And some similar.
And that proves one more time what Alan told us about the connection. Not only Alan, and Tamara mentioned it, and Eugen and Victor, about connection of the today's crisis with what was in the society before it. Because we know that the London police often stops to check the ID of young Black men, even though there are less of them there than white men. Yes, thank you, Alan, so much. And now I would like to ask Tamara to also dwell on the same topic. What can we transform masculinity into? And do we have to transform it? I like the idea a lot about granting men of the kind of a leadership to have more positive examples of how men can show on examples certain changes, and also on involvement them into fatherhood, and also being more active when solving problems on overcoming gender-based violence. This is a very relevant problem, not only in Ukraine, but in all the world. The pandemic has shown its real face, right? And as an example, in this world, in like all over the world, and in Ukraine, there is the campaign He for She on the level of UN. Even though this title is being criticized, but the idea of the campaign is to involve men to fighting for gender equality, involving and engaging men to conversations and discussions with other men on examples of equal to equal, showing that it is possible to be uh, courageous, but at the same time to take care of your health, to take care of health of your relatives. That care, it's not only, I mean, it's not just the economic component, it's also emotional labor. And I would, I think that the most relevant is the problem of violence prevention, because pandemic being in certain space increased violence inside, in the private sphere, indoor violence. And in fact, one of the important aspects of solving this problem is not only when we teach women not to act as a victim, or to protect themselves, or to run away somewhere, or where to address, but also when we pay more attention and teach men not to cause violence, and to direct this aggression in some other way. And if there are certain problems connected with work, or caused by economic challenges, then there must be more leadership, even from the we can have to see more leadership among politicians and the public sector and the civil society sector, more attention to such issues as fatherhood, counteracting violence, and more care of health. Tamara, Alan, your speculations are very interesting, and I'm sure they will be very useful. And it has occurred to me that being self-isolated in the limited space, it's it's also the possibility for men to learn something they didn't do before or didn't know about before. For example, they can cook, even it's not that traditional obligation, or even to clean and so on. And this can give them the chance, when there is another situation like this, to less suffer from the loss of work. They can find themselves in something else. So we already are receiving questions. We'll read them very soon. So if you want to express your opinions, Victor, then the floor is yours. Yes, yes, I would like to speak about where the masculinity can move. I think it is to be moved in the sphere of each and everyone's influence. Speaking about the youth, many people are speaking about the youth participation in life of the community and saying that we have to develop the possibility of the youth in the decision-making process. That's what Tamara mentioned. When we place men and women and all in the equal conditions and give them the possibility to show their leadership skills, we start to develop the masculinity in men, showing that indeed leadership skills can be developed not only in you but in many others, and except for them you can develop other skills. And another thing is the role games in the format of some like different games. For example, but in the beginning of the game you can choose who you're going to play, for a man or a woman, and after the game is already played, also these restrictions of masculinity or femininity are expressed in the way that something can be done by men, something can be done by women, and when you get into these circumstances you leave it. And it's important for us to erase the borders and to place them into equal conditions. I mean, all members of society are to be in equal conditions. And thank you, Victor. Now, yes, I shall comment and say that, in fact, when you walk in the street and you see a lot of social ads on having to comply with the lockdown rules, but when we spoke about masculinity, I just caught myself thinking that I never saw the social ad that would encourage men to underline their masculinity by wearing a mask. I've never seen that. I think that would have been a good solution to give the person, the man, the chance to play his social role, but to put it into the framework, making him look like a hero if he wears a mask. That's a paradox on paradox, and we are solving them. And we have 4 questions, and and not all of you are to answer these questions, but those who will be willing to. Olena from Kiev is asking, if studying masculinity, does it give the answer on the reasons of anti-gender movements and what to do about it? So, very acute and important question. May I? Yeah, yes, Tamara, okay. Indeed, the anti-gender or neoconservative movements, men are joining more and more among youth, like the tradition and order famous organization and others. It's the certain script or scenario of how men can quit the certain crisis, and they understand that they are changing, and the changing of women is changing gradually, and they become more visible, and here they see a certain threat, and that's why we have these neoconservatism situations. And it doesn't only happen in Ukraine only, we can observe it also in the USA, like the supporters of Trump are also the ideas of coming back to the traditions, conservative traditions. What to do about it? Well, as a representative of the educational sphere, I believe in the force of education, power of education. I think it's necessary to change education and to make it more critical, to include discussions more in education and certain subjects, and to have a more critical view at history, and to also include some subjects about human rights. So to explain why certain initiatives that are often practicing the violence, because we know that in city and in other cities there was the march for women's rights, and the participants, they were prosecuted, and they also experienced physical violence there. So it is repeated every year. Such typical trends, they have always been in place, because there are certain groups of people, often young people, it's like around subculture elements, that are deciding that through search of the mutual enemy, for example, women or LGBT or community or somebody else, that this way they can, they can recover their masculinity. So next question. If to these strengthened masculinity, so if men from smaller towns, they are more apt to this masculinity, so what can be done? Which tools or initiatives can be effective? That's a question from Anna, and perhaps Victor can comment on this. Okay. In fact, this question is about upbringing. When we say that the society sets the frame for a man and of his perception as a man and what makes him a man, this is not the question that can be solved in a year or two, but we are to change the informational paradigm of how the man to be perceived, that a man is not only about masculine features, that a man can have also the feminine features, that the man can cry. There must be this understanding, and it has to be included in the upbringing process. And how can we achieve the change in the upbringing? So first of all, it's the informational and educational campaigns and work. When we speak about upbringing, we have to also implement it in schools. There must be the same understanding, and there will the viewpoints changing. And if I may, a small comment, there is a good European practice, and we wanted to develop in Ukraine. Social changes can happen when there is an example, and it's important to develop youth mobility in Ukraine. There are many public initiatives, and now we are organizing the bigger campaign, because young people from villages and towns, they have to be able to see other examples, and these other examples are going to change their social behavior as well. The student of the Social Work Institute started answering this question, Viktor Zolotarenko, and Eugen Bondarenko, director of the Ukrainian Youth Center, also added him. And now I'm reading the next question from Tatiana from Kiev. How to motivate men and boys to take a better care of their health? Good question. And, I would like to ask it. I guess I wouldn't outline someone as a separate group to take care of your health. Taking care of one's health, it's the dynamic program that has to be modernized all the time and change, and they are to refer to the entire society. Separate practices can exist for certain target groups, which thanks to researchers can be formed, when they say that these target groups are in the risk group. But I don't think it's the right way to say that men are like the target group. And now I would like to go back to my previous thesis. Nothing teaches us as the experience and the examples. And it's very important to think about who can form these examples. So the work has to be done not only with youth, but perhaps with the older generation, because often the young person will see role models among opinion leaders, and these are the TV stars and who have blogs and tweet channels, and parents, teachers at the university. So it has to be and peers, right? We have to remember about them. Tamara mentioned equal to equal. Alan was also saying this. And another question is to Alan. Irina from Odessa is asking, I have a question on the sexual activity as one of the manifestation of masculinity. Has it increased or has it decreased? Is there any statistics on this account? For example, like, they say the harvest of babies of the spring lockdown.
Yeah, I haven't seen specific statistics on kind of fertility, but I mean, in general, in many societies, many cultures, masculinity is very tied to heterosexuality. And I think that's one of the reasons why, people from LGBTIQ communities have suffer in so many societies, both from their sexual desires being ruled illegal or socially stigmatized. So I think we do need to open up conversations about men and sexuality and have a broader view of sexual diversity as being part of this broader view of masculinity that we want to encourage. And, I'd link there the issue that Tamara raised about violence. A lot of the concern during lockdown was related to domestic violence, violence in the home from husbands to their wives mainly. But we've had the whole, I don't know what it was like in the Ukraine, but globally, we've had the whole Me Too movement over recent years, which really highlighted the extent of men's sexual violence against women. So that's an important conversation that we need to have more about. How do we talk to men about preventing their violence against women and helping other men not commit that violence? So I think this notion of building peer support networks. So if men can feel their frustration building about their life situation that can sometimes result in violence, then we need other men talking to them to help them deal with that. And also to make it unacceptable that sexual harassment and sexual violence is committed by men against women. Thanks, Andriy.
Thank you, Alan. So we are running out of time. And I told the organizer that we will not be late. We started later. Now we're only 4 minutes ahead, and it gives us 3 minutes more to discuss who will get the book. So who is that author who made the best question? The Defender of the Galaxy, with the autograph of Tamara Martsenyuk, who's the author of this book. So please tell us. I will inform you that we had the question from Tatiana from Kiev on how to motivate men and boys to take care of their health. Olena, Kiev, on anti-gender movements.
Ірина з Одеси щодо
Irina from Odessa on the sexual activity, and Anna on the sensitivity of men from smaller towns to the sharper feeling or more acute feeling of masculinity. So, dear participants, to whom will you give the book with the autograph of the author? I guess I'm the most interesting person here, but I guess I would like to say the question about the neoconservatism and those men who unite against this common enemy. Okay, so well accepted. I will be brief. So I support Tamara and I give Olena another vote. Eugen, so you vote for Olena. And the next person is actually going to decide who is going to do it, who's going to get the book. Alan? No, let it be Victor. I actually was hoping it would be Alan. Okay. I also support Tamara in her choice. So 3 participants have voted. So Alan, to give us 100% for one person, or to show us that there is 1/4 of disagreement.
I like the anti-gender question. Was that Olena's question?
Так,
Yes.
Yeah.
це
Okay.
Олена. Отже, пані Олена з Києва має
So Olena from Kiev has 4 votes for her question, and it's considered to be the best question, the most relevant one, and she will get be given the award. So the book of Tamara Martsenyuk, Defenders of the Galaxy, Power and Crisis in the Men's World. So I had a big temptation. I wanted to have questions, and I thought that I guess if if there wouldn't be any question, I guess I thought I would give this book to our interpreter. Since she hasn't gotten the award, I guess we have to actually clap her. Thank you for the translation. And now, so we do have very good, feedback on our discussion. So thank you so much, dear participants. Like 30 seconds each, I give you to sum up. And Yevhen will start, then Alan, then Victor, and Tamara. So Yevhen, 30 seconds. I think it was a wonderful discussion. I liked a lot that we raised questions on the perspective. So I would like to advise everyone. On Netflix, I found the movie. It's called Bad City, about work with difficult teenagers. And they say the phrase that the difficult teens, because their life is the most difficult. Thank you.
Thanks, Andriy. Yes, thanks. Great. It was a great discussion. I think my main message would be, I think men, we need to get much better at supporting each other to make these changes that we want to see. We don't have to do this all alone and try and change our lives all alone. So let's work together. Let's work with women as well to make the changes in our home lives and in our friendships to bring about gender equality. Thanks.
Дякую, Вікторе.
Thank you, Victor. I'm very glad that we raised such important questions in the wall of the youth center. But if my personal message, then it's the message for people of my generation, those who are 20 and something, 22, that these people must have to be motivated. They need to be motivated to wear the masks, to use the disinfectants. It seems the reality for us, but it goes without saying that we have to do it. But for somebody, it's still something not accepted by them. We are to motivate these people to provide safety. Tamara, pandemic is, on the one hand, is a big challenge, but on the other hand is the possibility to actually rethink the masculinity, reconsider the masculinity, and it's not possible without addressing the topic of the gender equality and egalitarian responsibilities and more active involvement of men to fatherhood. And I'm encouraging men to be more active and join different international initiatives like he for she, to feminism, to fighting for gender equality, especially to counteracting gender-based violence. Thank you, Tamara. Yes, so you can see how actually doable the encouragement of Victor. You see how I have put on the mask. And here can be very soon some of my grandchildren, so I need to protect them. So thank you all very much. And I'm sure that all those who were watching, they will draw their own useful conclusions. Because, you know, even putting even little efforts, we can achieve something. So I would like to thank the UNDP program, because without it, it wouldn't be possible.